Salt, a spiritual weapon. The question of whether salt can be considered a spiritual weapon is intriguing, leading us to explore its rich symbolism and significance within biblical texts and religious practices. The idea that a common substance, like salt, could hold spiritual power invites reflection on the ways in which physical elements are often endowed with deeper meaning in religious contexts. The Bible, in particular, offers numerous references to salt, suggesting that it is much more than just a culinary or preservative agent. It is a symbol of purity, covenant, and spiritual fortitude. In this exploration, we will examine how salt is portrayed in the Bible, its role in spiritual practices, and the ways in which it can be understood as a weapon in the spiritual life of believers. Salt's spiritual significance begins with its role as a preservative. In the ancient world, salt was essential for preserving food, preventing decay, and maintaining the quality of provisions. This practical use naturally evolved into a powerful metaphor in biblical texts, where salt is often associated with the preservation of moral and spiritual integrity. When Jesus refers to his disciples as the salt of the earth, he is emphasizing their role in preserving the values of his teachings in a world prone to moral decay. This metaphor extends beyond the preservation of food to the preservation of truth, goodness, and righteousness in the face of corruption and evil. In the Bible, salt is also linked to the concept of covenant. A covenant of salt is mentioned in the scriptures as a symbol of an enduring and unbreakable agreement. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, salt was a valuable commodity, and sharing salt with someone was seen as a sign of loyalty and friendship. This cultural practice is reflected in the biblical use of salt to symbolize the everlasting covenant between God and his people. For example, the book of Numbers mentions a covenant of salt that God made with the priests, signifying a perpetual and binding promise. This association with covenant underscores the idea that salt is not just a physical substance, but also a spiritual symbol of faithfulness and divine commitment. Salt's purifying qualities further contribute to its spiritual significance. In the Old Testament, salt was used in various purification rituals. For example, when the prophet Elisha purified the waters of Jericho, he did so by adding salt to the spring, making the water pure and drinkable. This act of purification with salt highlights its symbolic role in cleansing and sanctification. In spiritual terms, this suggests that salt can be used as a means of purifying the soul, protecting it from spiritual defilement, and maintaining its connection with God. The use of salt in rituals of purification is not limited to the Old Testament. It continues in various Christian traditions, where blessed salt is used to cleanse and protect individuals and spaces from spiritual harm. The metaphorical use of salt as a spiritual weapon can also be found in its connection to wisdom and discernment. In the New Testament, believers are encouraged to have their speech seasoned with salt, implying that their words should be wise, thoughtful, and preserving of the truth. This metaphor suggests that salt, in a spiritual sense, represents the wisdom to speak and act in ways that reflect God's truth and righteousness. As a spiritual weapon, salt equips believers with the discernment needed to navigate the complexities of life, avoiding the pitfalls of falsehood and moral compromise. Moreover, salt's role in spiritual warfare is reflected in its use in exorcisms and blessings. In various Christian traditions, salt is blessed and used to protect individuals and spaces from demonic influence. The act of sprinkling blessed salt is believed to create a protective barrier, warding off evil spirits and preventing their return. This practice is rooted in the belief that salt's purifying properties extend to the spiritual realm, making it a powerful tool in the fight against evil. The use of salt in these rituals highlights its perceived efficacy as a spiritual weapon, capable of defending against the forces of darkness and maintaining spiritual purity. The biblical account of Lot's wife, who was turned into a pillar of salt, provides another layer of meaning to the spiritual significance of salt. This story, found in the book of Genesis, serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of disobedience and looking back towards sin. When God commanded Lot and his family to flee the city of Sodom and not look back, Lot's wife disobeyed and was transformed into a pillar of salt as a result. This event is a stark reminder of the seriousness of divine judgment and the need for unwavering obedience to God's commands. In a spiritual context, the pillar of salt symbolizes the consequences of spiritual failure and the importance of staying true to the path of righteousness. The use of salt as a spiritual weapon is also connected to its role in the preservation of the gospel message. Just as salt preserves food from decay, believers are called to preserve the integrity of the gospel, protecting it from corruption and distortion. This responsibility involves both the personal commitment to live according to God's teachings and the collective effort to maintain the purity of the faith community. In this way, salt becomes a symbol of the believer's role in upholding the truth and resisting the influences that seek to undermine the foundation of their faith. The Bible also associates salt with the concept of sacrifice and dedication to God. In the book of Leviticus, salt is mentioned as a necessary component of grain offerings, symbolizing the enduring nature of the covenant between God and His people. The inclusion of salt in these offerings underscores its role in sanctification and dedication. In a spiritual sense, this implies that believers are called to offer their lives as a living sacrifice, seasoned with the salt of dedication and commitment to God's will. This sacrificial aspect of salt further enhances its significance as a spiritual weapon, representing the believer's willingness to live a life of purity and devotion. In addition to its biblical references, salt has played a significant role in the spiritual practices of various cultures. In many traditions, salt is used to cleanse and protect, creating a barrier against negative energies and spiritual threats. This widespread use of salt in spiritual rituals reflects a universal recognition of its symbolic power to purify and protect. Whether used to cleanse a space, protect against evil spirits, or seal a covenant, salt serves as a tangible reminder of the spiritual principles that guide the believer's life. Salt's symbolic meaning extends beyond protection and purification to encompass the idea of spiritual readiness. In the parable of the 10 virgins, Jesus emphasizes the importance of being prepared for His return. The wise virgins who brought extra oil for their lamps were ready when the bridegroom arrived, while the foolish virgins were left unprepared. This parable, while not directly mentioning salt, aligns with the broader theme of spiritual vigilance. Just as salt preserves and protects, believers are called to maintain a state of readiness, prepared to meet the challenges of life and the eventual return of Christ. The notion of salt as a spiritual weapon can also be understood in the context of spiritual warfare. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, describes the Christian life as a battle against spiritual forces of evil. While Paul does not explicitly mention salt as a weapon, the idea of being seasoned with salt can be interpreted as a call to spiritual preparedness, equipped with the wisdom and discernment needed to stand firm against the powers of darkness. In this sense, salt becomes a metaphor for the spiritual qualities that enable believers to resist temptation and overcome the challenges of the spiritual battle. In conclusion, salt holds a multifaceted significance in the spiritual life of believers. Its role as a preservative, purifier, and symbol of covenant gives it a profound spiritual symbolism, making it much more than just a physical substance. As a spiritual weapon, salt represents the qualities of purity, wisdom, and dedication that are essential for maintaining spiritual integrity and resisting the forces of evil. Whether used in rituals of protection, purification, or sacrifice, salt serves as a powerful reminder of the spiritual principles that guide the believer's life. In a world where moral and spiritual decay are ever-present threats, salt stands as a symbol of the believer's commitment to preserving the truth, living a life of purity, and maintaining an unbreakable covenant with God. Through its rich symbolism and practical applications, salt continues to be a potent spiritual tool, capable of protecting, purifying, and preserving the soul in its journey towards holiness.